Economist here. So in today's video, we are going to be talking about the curse of the working class and that there's no way to win, but there is. There really is a way to win at this game when it comes to understanding the economy and how it is that you position yourself. And I think that when we truly internalize it for ourselves, not by operating in the eyes of some other entity out there, some power that be that says, hey, we are in control, we understand the situation, just trust us. It's when you internalize it for yourself, trust your own opinion, trust your own research, and then start making decisions based on that trust of your own abilities that you really take control of everything that is out there. It doesn't matter what it is. Like, if it's the economy, if it's your security, if it's your future, it's all upon your decision making and how well it is that you do with that based on the information that you have gathered throughout your life. Now, I'm here to tell you that the working class individual is going to struggle going into the future. It's going to be a very difficult task to show up every day for your day job, be disciplined, put your money away, and have a decent retirement like we once did a long time ago when we think about what our parents did or our grandparents did. The options for the average everyday dude to use their average everyday job in order to acquire what it is that seems like an average American dream is gone. Like, those days are gone. Now, there might be someplace, somewhere, somehow that somebody can do it and they can prove it, like, hey, look at this guy. But for the majority of the people, they're not going to be able to go down that road. And so to understand why that is happening is critical to understanding what it is that you need to do, because there is a way to win at the game. That's the most important part. Like, people say, man, you're nothing but a doomsday. You talk about doomsday scenario. What I am trying to do is share with you the information that I have learned about the economic forces and the monetary policy that has now conditioned the average person who is not aware of the situation in a very compromised place. Like, I'm serious about that. This is no joke. So when we understand how it is that the Cantillon effect with new money supply coming into the system separates the rich from the poor and increases the wealth of the top income earners, like generally the top 20% from the numbers that I have seen lately. And as the top 20% of people are the consumers within this economy, they're the ones who end up being the focus. And the working class, they're not as important anymore. And this is an unfortunate consequence. We talk a lot about the labor market. We talk about the concern about, rising layoffs, and we talk about the concerns about the average everyday person having a struggling to make their paycheck, make it through the end of the month. We talk a lot about it, but there is no reversal to the trajectory. It is going to get harder and more difficult going into the future. I mean, just look at some of the things that are taking place now. The concentration of wealth is just unimaginable comparatively to what it was just a few years ago. I mean, even just since COVID, the concentration of wealth to the top household incomes has separated themselves in such a way that it literally makes the bottom 80% of the people almost insignificant in this. Top 10% of the households do 50% of the consumption or close to it. This is where the focus is. It used to be on the working class. Like, they used to try to benefit the working class, get the working class, out there with new jobs, wage increases. And with that new job and wage increase, you were able to participate in the economy by buying into all the consuming that needed to be done in order to create the economy that we now have. That consumer from the working class doesn't exist. I mean, they exist, but just in a small amount. So when it comes to trying stimulating the economy, they can get the people working all they want. In fact, historically low unemployment since the Obama administration really did not produce the inflationary scenario that typically the Federal Reserve would expect from an incredibly low, historically low unemployment rate. Like we've experienced over the last few years, the historically low unemployment is now being the focus of attention, saying, oh man, if we're not in a historically low unemployment, then that's a bad situation. That's what the Federal Reserve is now saying. Never mind the inflation. We're worried about the unemployment rising. So I think about it, what are you truly worried about? Are you worried about the people all of a sudden like not having a job to go to, and then that's going to cause a burden to the economy that seems to be resilient because the top 20% of household incomes seem to be the ones who are doing all the consuming, which is where all the numbers are coming from? Right? See, this is the curse of the working class. We're no longer in a position that does any kind of real benefit to the increase in aggregate demand that the Federal Reserve would be looking for by the lowering of interest rates. See, this is a sad tale to now see unfold. It's difficult for a lot of people to internalize, but when it came to the Federal Reserve trying to stimulate the economy, when things slowed down, they would lower interest rates, not to just get people going out there and borrowing money to consume, but to get corporations to invest and start hiring people. And that was generally the focus of the Federal Reserve by lowering interest rates, was to increase the labor market, or to increase the employment, right? To tighten up the labor market. By doing this, this created the inflationary scenario that they would be looking for. And now, when they do this, it doesn't work for them. Instead, their focus has now left the working class. They're no longer important to the scenario. And so the more you understand it, the more you recognize it, the more you say, okay, so now what is it that I do? Because my day job is just enough to pay the bills, but I have nothing extra from that. You got to learn to cut back or get extra money. You know, all the money beyond the money you're already making, the extra money. Without doing that, you're never going to win. You're right, there's no way to win. But if you do that, there is a way. So if you cut back on your expenses and you figure out a way to make extra money, the money beyond the money you're already making, now you might have a fighting chance to do something about it. And the luckiest part about this is that if you are young, you have the best opportunity to take advantage of compounding interest. So over time, you will be able to invest just small amounts every single month, and at the end of your life have a significant amount from that. And I guarantee you, when you start small, the more you do it, the bigger those contributions get. And by the time you're done, you will have a lot of money, but you got to start early. Take full advantage of compounding interest. And if you're not taking advantage of if you're not taking advantage of that, you have to take advantage of your skills. You have to take advantage of your situation that you have, like what it is that you have learned. You got to take that and then use that to the best of your ability. Sometimes that's understanding how it is that you're going to invest into the stock market. Some people, that might be starting a business. One way or the other, you got to figure out a way to place that money somewhere. To earn extra money is very difficult for people who don't rely on, or only rely on their day job and do not rely on anything else to try and get even a single dollar out there. They don't rely on themselves to go out and say, okay, how is it that I do internet sales or something on the internet that's going to generate $1? How is it that I start up a business or side hustle? See, these are the things that you have to do. If you don't, then you won't win. There's no way. See, most of the time, I think let's step it back, because a lot of times what you're going to find is people are saying, oh no, man, if we vote for the right person, we can win together, right? And I think, okay, well, sounds like a great story, and I mean, I'm on board. Let's go ahead and do it. But in the meantime, I'm not going to wait for that to happen. I'm not going to wait for the right person to come in and do the right thing and, condition everything to be super awesome for everybody, because I don't see any time in history that has ever happened. So I don't anticipate it ever happening into the future. But if it could, I'm down for it. Let's do it, right? In the meantime, I'm still going to figure out my own way. Don't blame me if I do. And I think if a lot of more people took that sort of attitude towards not only what it is that they do with their own skills and mindset and investments and all that, but when they think about how it is that they are voting with that money, Like if you literally think to yourself every time that money leaves your hand that you are placing a vote, it all of a sudden becomes something very different. Okay? Where you put that money, how it is that you spend it. Because you have to think about when you are given the option to do something that is going to be really significant, and that option disappears, and you think to yourself, well, how is it that they would do with the option again? See what's what I'm talking about here. I know that's kind of big. Here at COVID, there was a bunch of stimulus handed out, and household savings rose dramatically. And there was a small, very small, I don't even think it was a shrinking of inequality, but I think it was like it stopped growing, right? It stopped, getting bigger. During that time, that was the moment in which that the people who were able to increase their savings to do what would be the right thing, right? Like the way to win, like if you can either win or not, right? But there is a way to win, and that way to win is to, one, get out of debt, or two, deploy that money into something that is going to have a return. Now, after COVID and after the household savings disappeared, the inequality was worse. Why? Because the money was held on to till they absolutely needed it, or they spent it on a good time. Ultimately, it was not used to lower their debt, and it wasn't necessarily used to go out there and put it into a return that came back to them in a way that would then benefit them. Neither of those, like some people might have done that, but most of the people probably didn't do that with the money. And so it's easy to see how it is that the separation takes place every time they have new money injection. It just goes right to the top, no matter who you give it to first. I don't care who it is. All right, you can give it to the poor first. It doesn't matter. They will give it right to the rich. And if you don't believe me, just look at what happened over the last few years. I mean, you just have to look at any time in history. This is how it goes down. And so to understand that the injection of new money comes every single time that the government should do something, when you hear that, the government should do something, that is them doing something, which is the injection of new money, new debt issuance, and more separation between the rich and the poor. It's almost a guarantee that it's going to happen. Just know it. Just know it that it's going to go that way. And that if it is going to go that way, you better do something about it, because if you're planning on your day job being enough, just take a look at history right now and tell me, are the paycheck to paycheck situations growing or shrinking? Like, are more people living paycheck to paycheck now or less than they were? Going into the future, more people are going to be living paycheck to paycheck. So you think about it, it's like, oh yeah, a lot of those people are living paycheck to paycheck, but my day job, it seems to be enough. I'm able to cover the bills, got a little bit extra. I'm not too worried about it. I'm not necessarily living paycheck to paycheck. Going into the future, if the trajectory is going to stay the same as the direction that we are headed right now with the circumstances that we are now facing, 80% of the people will be working paycheck to paycheck jobs by 2050. So I think about a young person right now is picking a career path, thinking, oh man, this should be enough by the time I get there. They may find themselves working a paycheck to paycheck job, because the majority of people are going to be doing that. Now, don't get me wrong, things change. Anything can change. At any given time, circumstances can change. And when those circumstances do change, we find ourselves in the a whole new world that we were never expecting, and I can anticipate that might happen as well going into the future when it comes to these paycheck to paycheck jobs, because I find more and more people are figuring out ways to live beyond just the paycheck to paycheck job. Like, they have that job plus they have other channels of revenue, which is the only way that you're going to actually be able to make it. And the only reason why you have to do it that way is because everybody else is going to be doing it that way, and you have to compete against them. So as people are starting to figure out how it is that they get the extra money, now you have to figure out how to get the extra money, because you're competing against people who are getting the extra money one way or the other. Whether they're figuring out how to do day trades, how they're figuring out how to do a side hustle, figuring out online sales, whatever it is that they're figuring out. Everybody's figuring out some way to make money because money flies everywhere. It's constantly flying everywhere in every direction, and people just really need to learn how to figure out how to go out there and grab it. And it isn't like, you think about it, it isn't even like you have to go out there and just get some extravagant amount of it. When you really think about it, people think, oh man, you gotta have millions of dollars and drive Corvettes and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, nah, right? You just have to earn a little beyond what it is that you're earning or needing for your requirement to live. Yeah. If you can earn just some beyond that, now you have the capabilities to save, you have the capabilities of getting out of debt, you have the capabilities of doing things like getting into business, doing things that are much different than if you're riddled in debt, living paycheck to paycheck. Yeah. It's just like it's a whole new world of options. So the more you do that, the more you head in that direction, the more you realize that, yeah, there is no way to win if this is the way I'm going to do it with my day job. But there is plenty of ways of going out there and figuring out ways to do it beyond just the day job. And then, right, you can start being in the position in which that you are not getting separated as fast, right? Because you're still going to have separation between the rich and the poor. And that will probably forever be the case so long as we have central banking fiat currencies. And as it appears here real soon, we're going to be moving into the tokenization and digital currencies and all the other stuff that goes along with that, which is most likely going to lock us into this two-tiered system of classes, right? People who work and try to make that work, that day job, that hourly wage work for them and pay the bills, and everybody else who holds the assets. And how do you get your assets, right? I love living with my father and mother and wife and kids. I know, Kirk. Without a vision, the people perish. What's the America's vision? Yeah, it's too bad because America really, I mean, outside of maybe world dominance through the world, through the use of the dollar as the world reserve currency, which I know a lot of people are going to be like, aha, BRICS nations, pushback, right? That's all well and good to talk about, but when you really understand how much dollar-denominated debt exists out there, and it's like that's even hard to even fathom. Just when doing a little bit of research, you realize, oh my gosh, it's beyond belief, right? It's beyond anything that anybody could ever give it any consideration for. It's just like, I mean, hundreds of trillions of dollars in dollar derivatives and dollar denominated contracts that literally, like, nobody knows how big it really is. When those contracts, when that comes due, there's not enough dollars to cover it, and that's going to create some serious problems. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, the BRICS nations are going to be some serious problems, and I'm thinking not even close, right? Not even close. BRICS nations are an insignificant problem comparatively to the dollar denominated debt. They're an insignificant problem, right? Comparatively. Like, I'm not saying they're not a problem. What I'm saying is they're an insignificant problem comparatively to the dollar-denominated debt that exists outside the world or outside the country, all around the world, that doesn't have anything to do with the United States. Nothing. Not the banks, not the government, not the people, not the corporations, nobody, nothing doesn't have anything to do with the United States except that these debts were written due in dollars. And that is scary when those things start to come due, how much demand for dollars really exists out there. And if the Federal Reserve could even print at a pace that is fast enough to cover all that. That is literally what keeps me up at night when I think about, man, how in the world is the Federal Reserve going to do that? They can't just go buy U.S. Treasury debt. They got the United States already on an unsustainable debt path. Can you imagine trying to buy up the U.S. Treasury debt in a massive quantitative easing in order to provide the world with enough dollars to cover the dollar-denominated debt that exists out there? It would be just ridiculous. It couldn't happen that way. But the Fed could buy the debt of a foreign nation because they already have the authority to do it. Now, they don't do it. I've never heard of them doing it, but they do have the authority to do it because Ben Bernanke said that's what they may have to do way back in 2002. Like Ben Bernanke warned us of everything that we are facing right now in a speech given back in 2002. It's called Deflation and How to Prevent It from Occurring Here. In fact, it was November of 2002. Go look it up for yourself. It's one of the most telling speeches that a guy could ever have given about monetary policy and what it is that we were about ready to face with monetary policy and the lower bound of zero. Yeah. Ben Bernanke straight up warned about it 6 years before it happened. Right? People are talking, oh man, Ben Bernanke, he's some idiot. Blah, blah. And I'm thinking, well, maybe if you had listened to his warning 6 years earlier, you wouldn't be facing the consequences of it. And he talked about this right here, right now, how it is that the Federal Reserve is going to handle the situation in which that they need to deploy more of their liability. That means the Federal Reserve needs to put out more money, needs to put out more cash. They need to figure out a way to deploy that and not send the United States on an unsustainable debt path. How in the world do they do it? They need an asset to buy. What asset could they possibly buy? Well, they have mortgage-backed securities. Not enough. It's not enough to do it. But the entire globe sovereign debt market? Oh, baby. Talk about all the debt in the world to buy. Central bank digital currency tokenization. Could you not just see it coming? It's just like it's on its way. And when this happens, there's going to be ever increasing amounts of new money, and the working class will never have a chance. You have to do something beyond that. If you don't, you're going to be left behind. There's all there is to it. You may have some place somewhere in which that you might be able to pull it off, and you might be young enough that you could take advantage of compounding interest, but the rest of us, not a fighting. There's no chance in the world the average day job is going to be enough. It's just not going to work. All right, what time is it? All right, I got a few more minutes here. Maybe if we prop up Argentina, we could get some decent footballers in return. Well, I guess that's true. Alrighty, the Treasury just needs to start making new greens and get rid of the old currency. It will be detox. Let the rest of the world do whatever. I'm not sure. We would have to go into a deeper discussion of that, but I don't know about just swapping paper for paper and making that work. Hey, UE, what are your thoughts on the banks using the Fed repo market for liquidity? Any insights? Well, see, now this is the thing about, people get really excited about the repo facility, and now I thought to myself, the repo facility wasn't a surprise when it fired up back in September of 2019. I had done a video called Things Are Changing, and it was like within the first year of me making videos here on YouTube, and it was talking about the repo facility. It was saying, basically the Fed was addressing the idea that they wanted a standing repo facility. Okay, so let's think about something that happened prior to September of 2019, right? Because 2019, the repo facility fired up, which was a pressure relief for a cash liquidity crisis that was taking place within the banking system. Now, this cash liquidity crisis that was taking place within the banking system, the Federal Reserve says, nah, if there's not enough cash, no worries, we're going to fire up this repo facility. You guys got a bunch of treasuries. We'll take the treasuries. We'll hand you cash, and we'll swap this out every single day. And then a lot of people call this like non-QE QE. All right, so I was one of those people calling it non-QE QE. Okay, so anyway, understanding that there was this huge cash withdrawal from the banking system that was due to a corporate tax payment, but anyway, that's took it from the money from the banking system to the Treasury General account, which essentially made the cash disappear from the banking system on a particular day, right? And the interest rate shot up. The Fed stepped in, repo facility, give us the treasuries, we give you the cash, interest rates come down. Now, this was all taking place in what they refer to as a limited reserve system. Now, a limited reserve system was based on the idea that at the end of the day, there was a reserve requirement for these banks. At the end of the day, some of the banks would be in need of reserves and some of them would have excess reserves. The ones who had excess reserves would lend them to the ones who were in need of reserves until they found that they had met the reserve requirement, and then they would be able to do business the next day. This overnight lending rate between the big banks in order to meet the reserve requirement was the effective fund rate. So when the Federal Reserve tried to adjust interest rates, this interest rate, this overnight lending rate, that was the interest rate that they were targeting. They would do this by buying and selling treasuries off the big banks, adjusting the reserve levels so that they could get this overnight lending rate to land within what it is that they wanted for the effective fund rate, which was the Fed funds rate. The Fed funds rate is the target rate. It's as if they wrote it on the wall. The effective fund rate is what they are shooting to try and adjust, right? So the effective fund rate is the overnight lending rate between these big banks. That's during a limited reserve system. COVID changed it by quantitative easing, and the Federal Reserve removed the reserve requirement, and they had zero reserve requirement, and the big banks were just loaded with reserves. So now they didn't need to borrow from each other. They actually had excess reserves at the, from the quantitative easing that was taking place. So now the repo facility works both ways. They can also take cash and provide, right, the treasuries. We got all these treasuries, we got all this stuff on our balance sheet. We can take the cash, the excess liquidity off your balance sheet. And there's also another place called the the account on excess reserves. So now the Federal Reserve has two spots that the excess liquidity can go to. It can go to the interest on excess reserves, which is an account there, right? And then they can also put it at the repo facility. And between these two, they are now able to channel the Fed funds rate. Very important to understand this, right? So with this excess liquidity in the repo facility and the interest on excess reserves being the channel in which that they are able to establish the effective fund rate, people are very concerned that this repo facility is going to eventually bleed out of liquidity, or that the banks stop using it, or something of this nature. And now to me, I'm thinking, well, it wasn't too long ago that this repo facility wasn't even an operation. It was a pressure relief. They only used it sometimes. And ultimately, the overnight lending rate between the big banks with a limited reserve system is how the Federal Reserve typically had conducted themselves prior to COVID, and really, the quantitative easing of 1, 2, 3, and 4, these short times in which that they removed the reserve requirements and were operating in an abundant reserve system. So understanding the repo facility itself is really like a secondary facility comparatively to how the Federal Reserve would typically have operated without it. Okay? And so to me, even the reduced use of it or the expanding use of it is really just signs of how it is that the banking system is in need, or an operation of the liquidity. Some people give it a lot of news. They're like, look at this, and to me, I'm like, yeah, but this is kind of now part of the game, right? It's their new tool that they use, and now every time it it fires off, everybody's like, oh gosh, look at this, And so I guess it could have more meaning to it than what I'm giving it. But ultimately, from what I have learned and what I was studying from the Federal Reserve prior to 2019, the repo facility is something that they wanted. They wanted it as a standing repo, as a standing facility, not just a temporary or a possible tool. Yeah. And you really have to think they're opening up the discount window too, which is something that they no bank wanted to ever use. So the discount window was typically where a bank would go to get liquidity. If they were in search of liquidity, they would go to the discount window looking for that money. Now, when the banks started taking advantage of that, I'm talking Depression era type stuff, when they were way back in the day. The banks were using it to buy into the stock market. They would borrow from the discount window and then throw it into stocks. And so it ended up getting pushed into the idea that if you are using the discount window, you only use it during times of absolute stress. Like if you cannot find liquidity anywhere else, then a bank can go to the discount window. And it held this huge stigma for like a very long time. Like nobody will ever, like if a bank went there, all the rest of the banks would be like, ooh, you in trouble, you know? But what they did is they did something kind of clever, and they forced all the banks to use the discount window a couple of times a year, right? So now when a bank goes to it, they're like, hey, it's the standard operations. We have to do this. Everybody has to use the discount window at some point. So that if a bank is in trouble and they go to the discount window, they're not like pointed out saying, oh, what are you doing over there, right? They're able to like essentially use the discount window without in somewhat of a secrecy of reasoning why, or at least not bringing like alert to it, to the idea of them using it. Does that kind of make sense? Anyway, what time is it? All right, I got a few more minutes here, guys. Are you guys having fun? 211 people watching with 68 thumbs up. Continue to hit that thumbs up button. Always distracted. You want to be recession proof. Love your family first. Absolutely correct. Okay. Banks also use the FHLB for liquidity. Buy silver, platinum, and crystallized osmium. Like and share. Thank you so much, everybody who has hit that like button. We got 72 people who have hit the like button with 214 people watching. Thank you so much for hitting that like button. Thank you for joining in on today's live stream. Repo is a liquidity tool, nothing really more than that. Doomsdayer are delusional. The minions will have to go green. It'll just be too expensive not to. Martial law would take overnight. What do you guys call when trouble is near? Ghostbusters. Right on, Kirk. Cruise back up here a little bit. People really overreacting on first brands. Holy smokes, worse than 08. Well, I mean, you think about it, like, the problem that was being faced back in 08, and this is really where, like, I think it gets pretty complicated for a lot of people, is that back in 08, when the Federal Reserve took the Fed funds rate to zero, like zero interest rate policy, and fired up the quantitative easing. Okay? So here they took the balance sheet of $850 billion to over $4.5 trillion, and they had zero interest rate policy running consistently for years. And unemployment fell and fell and fell and fell, right? And the unemployment got historically low at the end of the Obama administration, and the Fed was panicking because they couldn't find the inflation. They couldn't find the inflationary scenario that they were looking for. Now, something was taking place. The separation between the rich and the poor was still happening because the asset prices were going up, right? Stock market went up, house prices went up, bond market went up, like all these things continued to go up. But these aren't things that the working class typically buys into. Like they might have 401 retirements and stuff like that. But for the most part, the average everyday person lives paycheck to paycheck. They don't participate in these things. And so they didn't see their wealth increase. Now, granted, the inflation that the Federal Reserve was looking for also didn't take place. Their wages didn't necessarily go up that much, and the inflation didn't go up that much, and the separation totally started to take place. And so they were like panicking. They were like, man, how do we get the inflation to actually happen here? Right? We have lower bound to zero interest rates. We have historically low unemployment. We got, the jobs market is like as good as it's going to get, and these people are not able to increase their consumption in a way that causes the inflationary scenario. Now, I know that right there that I described is probably one of the weirdest things that people had ever heard, but that's the seriousness of the situation, is that the Fed was like, crap, now what do we do? See, if you go and you read the speech, Monetary Policy Strategies for a Low Neutral Interest Rate World, it was given November of 2018 by New York Fed President John Williams, and he straight up says it right in there. The low neutral interest rate world, which is the interest rate when the Federal Reserve is neither accommodating nor restricting the economy, it's when they are neutral, was almost at zero. There was no accommodations coming from the lower interest rates. The working class was screwed at that point. Here they had all these jobs, they had all this work, they had all this options, and it wasn't creating the inflationary scenario that they were looking for, and the separation in the classes was happening. This scared the hell out of the Federal Reserve. Now, here it is, we have COVID coming in. At the same time, the Federal Reserve was attempting to deploy something called the makeup strategy. And now, with the makeup strategy to elevate inflation and inflation expectation, they could pull that neutral interest rate up off the lower bound to zero. None of this stuff was going to benefit the working class. However, the entire economy would begin to collapse if they didn't do this. As they started to create the inflationary scenario, COVID took over and made it happen. Severing the supply chain, stimulus packages, inflationary scenario abound through the mainstream media narrative. There was zero doubt that anybody had that the inflation was coming from the money printer. Everybody knew it. They swore it up and down, and it totally benefited the Fed, because now they have the neutral interest rate coming off the lower bound of zero. This, again, has no benefit to the working class. The stimulus package, maybe for a minute, right? But what do we learn? The stimulus package all gets spent, and the working class and the poor are still poor, and the rich are even richer. So it might have alleviated the pain for a minute, but it didn't solve any kind of problem. As we go down this timeline and we find the elevated inflation expectation due to credible threats of tariffs, we're finding the neutral interest rate is getting pulled higher. Now, at the same time, we have Fed officials who are saying quite the opposite. The newest Fed member to the FOMC, Myron, Trump's pick, is saying exactly the opposite. And now when I think about this Fed official coming out saying exactly the opposite about the neutral interest rate comparatively to all the rest of the Fed officials who have been watching the neutral interest rate rising over the last few years, this discrepancy was done on purpose, creating the devil advocate idea of what it is that's happening out there in order to create an open-endedness to the Fed's monetary policy. This, again, does not benefit anything of the working class. But those who recognize it, those who understand what it is that's happening and can understand that that neutral interest rate is rising and it's getting ever closer to the Fed funds rate, it's making the economy far less restricted than anybody had ever given any consideration for, that is benefiting the top 20%. It doesn't benefit the working class. This is where we're at today. Every single time you see somebody out there screaming the pains and screaming the idea that the tariffs are causing all this inflation and going to be inflationary, and how it is that the problems are going to persist and get worse, right? Every time you take that and you internalize it, it's only a benefit to the inflationary scenario that goes right to the top 20%. I don't know what else to tell you. If you don't see it, then you're going to be wishing and hoping and dreaming that somebody can come and rescue you. But when you see it and you recognize it, and then you can think to yourself, man, what is it that I need to do now, because my day job isn't going to cut it? And if I can get extra money, I can deploy that money into something that is going to have a return. And the more I do that over time, I will find myself separated from the poor. And if I don't do that, I'm going to get stuck in the bottom 80% of people living paycheck to paycheck. Because that's where it's headed. Things could change, who knows, right? 200 people watching. This is awesome. Let's go check out the super chat before we call it quits, because I got like literally 5 minutes left here. All right, Pasture Pig, thank you so much for the $4.99. I'm in retail too. Apps are rising, but quality app is really low. I think the two-tiered economy is here. You're the only one that discusses it. Well, when you see it, and see, like, the thing is like when you see it with boots on the ground, like I work retail, right? I work a retail job at a mom and pop lumber yard in the middle of the Pacific Northwest, but I also see that industry. The lumber industry is huge here. I mean, like, I live all right in the middle of tree farms. There's mass logging, trucking operations, mill operations. I know other people who are in this industry, and so really there's no corner of that I can't see. Working here at the retail job gives me view of all kinds of stuff beyond just the lumber industry, and then having a macroeconomics view then just puts it all together. So when I start to talk, I know I talk in a way that is way different from what other people are talking, but then again, most people who are talking macroeconomics are at 30,000 feet. They're looking down on the whole thing. I'm down on the ground looking up. It's a whole different kind of view. And so as they're explaining what it is that's taking place, and if only those rich billionaires would do their like, okay, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be all judgmental. I was listening to one of my favorite comedians, Bill Burr, and there was a little short that popped up after I was watching him. And he was talking, I forget who he was talking with, but basically accusing billionaires of not providing enough wage to the people that work for him in their corporation. And I'm thinking to myself, well, okay, I mean, you can accuse them of that, that's fine. And I do get the idea that they make an insane amount of money, and then the working class people could hardly make any money at all. But it's not them, it's the time, it's the overwhelming amount of new money that has come into the system that has separated the rich from the poor in such a dramatic fashion that this now occurs. And so to blame the billionaire on this, as opposed to recognizing how the underlying economic forces have separated the rich from the poor in such a dramatic way, the problem, like, you will never be able to position yourself to deal with that. Because instead, it's the billionaire's fault for being so greedy and not sharing. Right? Instead of understanding that mass amounts of new money has come into the system and separated the rich from the poor, because that's what's going to happen every time. Right? Again, like, I don't like it. I don't want it to be that way, and I wish there was something that is easy as, hey, make the billionaires pay their fair share. I mean, go for it. But, like, I don't see any time in history that's worked. Not without, like, communistic type behaviors, All right, I can't read too many more of these guys. Thank you so much for the super chats too. Infamous NYC, one of the biggest contributors to the channel. Thank you so much for everything you've ever done, man. $2. Thank you. Just got here watching from the start. Oh, right on, man. I hope you enjoy everything. You're a legend, UE. Thanks for everything. You bet, guys. I hope as we break this stuff down, I try to share it regularly, and I know it seems like I'm very redundant in a lot of the information that I'm trying to share. And I don't know, like, I'm not trying to explain myself in it, but I know for a lot of people, when they hear it different ways or they hear it many times, it starts to click. Like, a lot of times the belief system, especially the older you get, the belief system becomes very difficult to crack, right, to get through, because it's so ingrained in us. And so you might hear about the neutral interest rate, but then all of a sudden you hear something going off about how Trump is going to force the Federal Reserve to do something, and you're like, oh, that's it, right? But it's not. Think about the neutral interest rate. That's what they're going for. That's what they're trying to that's what they were focusing in on, right? So this happens, right? As we grow older and we, like, lock those beliefs in, the more we hear it in a different way, it becomes something easier to understand and then internalize. And so, again, like, when I repeat a lot of the information, you know, so that it can stick. You know, because this is the way it's going down. Like, I haven't changed my tune one little bit. Like, you can go back and watch videos that I had done years ago talking about what it is that I feel is going to happen with the neutral interest rate and inflation expectations and stuff. And this is all playing out. I mean, I didn't know they were going to use tariffs and stuff like that, but I had a feeling that they were going to keep the supply chain broken somehow. You know. Alrighty, guys, what time is it? Oh, I gots to go. You're so awesome for being here. 202 people watching with 94 likes. Do me a favor, go off and hit that like button one more time so that we can get the algorithm to grab this video and spread it around for more people to join in. Thank you so much for being here. Uneducated Economist, you let me know.